If you look at New Mexico, if you're from New Mexico and you know our history, then you know that we've been struggling for a lot of years. We understand that we're one of the poorest states in the country. We also understand that a lot of our youth don't get 3 meals, maybe not even 1 meal a day. Folk are going hungry.
Our relationship with food has been drastically changed by colonization and capitalism. And, you know, if you don't have money, you don't get food. You know, we got brothers and sisters on the street, can't cook food. There's no access to it. Just these essential things, right? Eating food, bathing yourself, shelter. A big majority out there, we could provide something for them if we changed our systems up, you know?
When we first started having these conversations, you know, New Mexico has some of the worst food deserts in the country. And what we've learned from some of our allies, our mentors, people that we look up to in the food movements, is that, you know, they're very intentional about not calling it a food desert.
We're, I think, a little bit lucky in New Mexico to not be so far removed from our agrarian heritage, and you know, lots of our grandparents were still farmers. Mine goes a few generations back, but I know it's still there, and so it's a little bit easier for us to put ourselves back in the picture of being a part of the ecosystem, being a part of the land.
As organizers and working with the kind of projects we work in, we started thinking that, you know, maybe if we started growing food, you know, we can do better. We can find places like the one that we have at the Project Feed the Hood, and we could start teaching people from different communities and from schools how to grow food.
So we started Project Feed the Hood in 2009 with this radical idea that people should have food to eat.
It started with Rodrigo reaching out. He knew I was doing some like school garden stuff, so I started getting into gardening pretty heavy, and Rodrigo's like, yo, you gotta meet Joaquin. He had mentioned they were thinking about starting a garden where not only was it a garden, but it was used as a vehicle for social justice. It wasn't just, you know, growing food for fun, but it was like we wanted to be rooted in the community and be a powerhouse for justice and positive social change. So I was like, that sounds dope, let's do it. If we just have a little water well around it, guess where the roots are gonna go?
Straight down?
Straight down, just right in that little area, right? We want these roots to go.
Be able to feed themselves, you know, by growing food and by all of us sharing seed, we can grow together, and at the same time, we can organize ourselves to try to do better, to try to get better people elected. And so using the idea of growing food, we started up the project.
Well, the Black Beret organization was founded actually here in Albuquerque in the late 60s. Right before Dr. King was assassinated, he called for the national mobilization. It was called the Poor People's Campaign to Washington, D.C. And I was young. I was a younger person in those days and was fortunate enough to be in many of the meetings around the mobilization to Washington. We went to Washington in a caravan. We did the New Mexico delegation. The caravan was made up of younger people, adults, elders, and so we had a lot of time to talk to each other. We would talk about the history of New Mexico. Some of the elders would share some of that history of New Mexico and so on. But when we got back, there was a potato cooperative. Some of the women elders and some of the men elders contacted us and asked us if we would come to northern New Mexico. There were some things that they wanted to talk about. Then the elders began to ask us additional questions, and they asked about our trip to Washington. And they said, look, was this a momentary piece in your life? I mean, was it a tourist trip to Washington? So what are you all thinking about? I mean, in terms of other struggles here in New Mexico over land and water and the various issues here. The elders left us and asked us to always remember 3 very particular things. Number 1 was never forget where you came from. Number 2 was always remember those that make it possible for you to be here. And then 3rd, always give back to others what's been given to you. So when we came back, then we started having some discussions, and we would ask questions of the adults and of the elders. If we were to form a youth organization, What issues do you think that we should work on? So there was several things that obviously came up: the lack of unemployment, education, the lack of food security. And so that's kind of in the beginning where the Black Berets were born. But it really was about self-determination. That's what I'm talking about. And it was really about our people expressing their self-determination. Huh?
So a lot of issues we had to deal with, and we dealt with them in those, 50 years ago. And food was always an issue. So like food is an issue everywhere. It was not that hard to put a program that says we got to figure out how to feed our kids. They're going to school hungry. The idea was we weren't going to be able to feed everybody, but we were able to start embarrassing the city to put in free breakfast program.
Let's never ever think that anything's been given to us out of the kindness of somebody's heart or whatever. No? It's come through struggle. So it was really about that. That's what we're doing right now. I think the intersectionness between what SWOP's doing with Feed the Hood is connected. I will not speak for SWOP. SWOP will speak for themselves.
SWOP has a long history of doing environmental justice work here in New Mexico and in the Southwest, talking about environmental racism and environmental degradation, talking about community resiliency. And one of the things that we focused on early on in Project Feed the Hood was really conversations about water and about land and how we use land, how we use our resources in our communities. Under like a capitalist system, food in New Mexico is very much like an extractive economy, right? So one of the things that we focused on early on was really challenging narratives. And so our community garden is actually on a piece of property that's owned by the city. And it's in a low-income community, mostly people of color, immigrant community.
That space, it was full of needles, booze bottles and whatnot. We had to clean the whole thing. Cleaned it up and turned it into a garden. And so folks started coming in.
I remember just bringing in a dump truck full of compost, and just getting all excited, transforming. Now it's all beautiful and green and there's things growing. But when we first got here, it was broken glass, just not a good space in the community. And it's very similar to what we see across our neighborhood still today, right? We got empty lots that are trashed out. We got spaces that could be cultivated. So, for us, it represented hope. Like, hey, if we could turn this empty lot into something productive, we could do this in other neighborhoods.
It's kind of since grown exponentially to include school gardens, community farms, food box projects now during the pandemic, school-based garden education, nutrition education. We're kind of all over the place nowadays.
One of the things that makes the garden a really big deal is not every kid is academically, motivated, but they do come out to a space like this and all of a sudden they find a place where they belong and they can, do something and be successful at it. And I think that's really important for our kids because a lot of them have got to this point in school and they've never really found any kind of success, and all of a sudden here they are in the garden and they can build and they can grow and they can be a part of the space. They learn about the science, they learn about agriculture and the importance of it.
This has taught me a lot about, where food comes from, how it goes about its process, and we have things of what we call reciprocal learning bonds and intergenerational knowledge. So like the knowledge from the older brothers like Travis would be passed down to me, and then I would be able to pass down that knowledge or skills, information, whatever it is, to the younger youth.
A lot of my work is going to be centered here at Project Feed the Hood here in the International District. What we're trying to do here is just sort of have a growing educational space for youth to come in and learn about agriculture, learn about gardening, learn about themselves, and see what they can do to sort of change the world they live in. Coming in as, just this young kid and having that acceptance come from someone from such an older generation It was really beautiful and really inspiring, and it supported me in realizing how hard I can work, and just being able to understand what you're doing, where you are, and when you're doing it, and just living in that moment. And you know, I think that was one of the most important parts for me.
I started with all of this because of biology, right? It started through the university, and I started initially as a biology major, who later went on to do Chicano studies, and then who later went on to incorporate sustainability studies. My skill ended up being working with kids, right? Working with the young ones and doing that. And so being able to, one, like, inspire another generation of young people to like come up, right, from these neighborhoods and to be able to like take control of their food system, like that's something that I think of now, right? But back then when I was doing it, right, I kind of thought of it as like smaller reflections of me. Those students that I saw had that kind of capacity and were reflections of myself were the ones that I wanted to be there for. Be that young man of color that they can look up to and be like, you know what, like that guy did it.
So somewhere between the Black Berets 50 years ago and the Southwest Organizing Project today, we continue, and that's how we're able to stay in connection with nuestra gente, our communities. And we'll continue to do that, whether it's through the Project Feed the Hood and or out working in the small farms. We're doing that also.
We have big dreams about expanding the whole program and just keep building it.
So that's what we're doing here. That's why we're growing what we're growing. We're eating very, very well.
And building gardens, for example, like this one, in a way that does intentionally, you know, work with the natural ways of the land and work with the ecosystem. This garden is here not just to grow food, it's here to empower the students, and it's here to increase biodiversity. My vision is really just that agroecological corridor, because agroecology is a vehicle for food sovereignty. And putting as many of these spaces as possible in the ground is what's helping fulfill that vision. And community is collaborating and building and, you know, leveraging resources. And so, yeah, we're living the vision, and we still have a long ways to go on that vision, but it's being built from the ground up.